Good morning to guests out in the audience and to this board. Today is March 14th, and before I start the meeting, I would like to dedicate this meeting in honor of Peg Moore, since she passed away earlier this year, and we haven't been together as a board with Peg for, what do you say, about 6 months? Yeah, about 6 months, maybe, long time. She would be, her judgments, her influences, her insights will be greatly missed, not only on the board, but as the city of Temecula as well. She was one of the founding people of Temecula, and expressed my appreciation for knowing her as long as I had. And so anyway, with that, I'd like to dedicate this meeting in honor of Peg Moore. Okay. So moving right along, let's see, call the roll. And we're going to do the flag salute by Commissioner DeVal. Please, everybody all stand up, all rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For the roll call, I'd like to call Board Member Bays,
Present.
Board Member Duvall,
Present.
and Chair Jackson.
Present.
All are present.
Okay. Public comments?
We have none.
None? All right, then I will skip the reading of the description for that. Consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one roll call vote. There will be no discussion on these items unless members of the boards request specific items to be removed from the consent calendar for separate action. A total of 30 minutes is provided for members of the public to address the board on items that appear on the consent calendar. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Public comments may be made in person at the meeting by submitting a speaker card to the board secretary or submitting an email to be read out loud in the record at that meeting. Emails, comments must be submitted to Old Town Local Review Board, Temecula.gov, excuse me. Speaker cards for in-person comments will be called in order received by the board secretary, and then, if time remains, email comments will be read. Email comments on all matters must be received prior to the time the item is called for public comment. All public participation is governed by the council policy regarding public participation at the meetings adopted by resolution number 2021-54. Okay. Meeting minutes. Recommendation that the board approves the action meeting minutes for November 8th, 2021. They get a
Do we have a motion?
motion?
Motion to approve the minutes?
Second? Second.
So Board Member Bays made the motion and Duvall seconded. It passes 3-0.
Do you want us to do the?
Oh, we don't use that. You
Yeah.
can do a voice vote.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's see, what do we have here? Members of the public may address the public, the board on business items that appear on the agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. Public comments may be made in person at the meeting, submitting a speaker card to the board secretary or by submitting an email to be read out loud into the record at the meeting. Email comments must be submitted to Old Town Board at temeculaca.gov. Speaker cards in persons will be called in the order received by the board secretary, and then, if time remains, email comments will be read. Email comments on all matters must be received prior to the item called to public comments. All public participation is governed by the council policy regarding public participation meeting adopted by Resolution 2021-54. So our next item on business is the budget engagement section. And, oh,
That'd be me.
yes, it
Okay.
would be. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Board. My name's Jennifer Hennessy. I'm the Director of Finance, and this morning we're going to be going through a budget engagement session. This is the second year in a row that we have done these. We've met with every board and commission of the city in an effort to try to gain feedback regarding the city's investment in our community and whether that's in line with priorities. I will go ahead and get started here. We'll briefly touch on the budget process, some key budget policies. I'm going to provide an update on the fiscal highlights for 21-22, our current fiscal year. And then we have a few discussion questions at the end. And I'll give you a preview of what those discussion questions are here. And at the end, or throughout the presentation, keep these in mind, because at the end we will revisit these. As a commissioner or board member, do you feel that the city's investment of financial resources is in line with community's priorities? And then if yes, which programs or projects are most beneficial to the community? And if not, how could the city better align its spending with community priorities? So each year our budget process starts in the January timeframe, and we review all of the current year's budget, and then we update the 5-year financial projections that serve as a baseline for the next fiscal year's budget. In February, we do a thorough mid-year budget update, and we bring to council any changes to the current year's budget. And then we also kick off the next fiscal year's budget, as well as the capital improvement program, or CIP. And then also between the months of February and March, we do these budget engagement sessions with each of the 5 boards and commissions. And then in March through April, that's when staff works really hard to develop their proposed budget, or their requested budgets, which ultimately turn into our proposed budget that's brought to the council in the May timeframe. There's a daytime budget workshop that's held, and the council will review the proposed budget and the capital improvement program budget. And if they have any changes to those, we will bring those forward to them in June, and then the council adopts the annual operating budget and the CIP at their first meeting in June, in time for the new fiscal year to start July 1. And then throughout the year, finance staff works with departments to do ongoing analysis of their budget projections and how their actual revenues and expenditures are aligning with budget projections. And if adjustments are needed, then we make those adjustments throughout the year. There's several different tools or sources of information that help create the budget recommendations, one of which, the center box there, the prior year carryover. So these are where projects or programs have begun in the prior fiscal year but maybe not have been completed. So the first thing we want to do is ensure that the budget is carried over to complete those projects. So that becomes part of our appropriation recommendations. And then we get information from various sources, one of which is a community satisfaction survey. So every few years, the city conducts a community satisfaction survey of, it's a statistically valid survey of anywhere from 400 to 1,000 residents. And we gather what their main concerns are, what their main priorities are, and that information is then weaved into our budget recommendations for funding of certain projects or programs. The boards and commissions feedback, that's what we're doing today. And then we also have several programs or services master plans. So we have a community services master plan, housing plans, things of that nature. So recommendations from those plans typically will be incorporated into the capital improvement program, but they may also be program related, so they may be incorporated into the TCSD budget or whatnot. So information from those plans are included. And then there's a handful of city council policies. They adopt fiscal policies every year as part of the budget. And in the beginning of February, we bring certain fiscal policies to the council for them to affirm that those policies are still good, that they remain intact through the next budget cycle. And we'll go over a few of those key policies today as well. The key deliverables throughout the budget process are, the first one is the preliminary budget, and this incorporates all of the departmental requests. We include the preliminary budget in presentations. It's an internal document, so it's really just internally us presenting it to the city manager in the April timeframe. And then the city manager reviews those requests and develops his recommendations. And his recommendations go into what's called the proposed budget, and that is what's presented to council at their May workshop. And that's where we will include recommendations from these budget engagement sessions in that proposed budget. And then finally, as I mentioned, the council will adopt the final budgets in the first meeting in June, the annual operating budget, as well as the capital improvement program budget. So some of the policies that play a major role in how we develop the budget would be what we do with available general fund balance. So the general fund can be thought of as the city's primary operating fund. It is unrestricted in nature so long as the expenditures provide a public purpose. So it's the primary fund of the city that funds police and fire, public works, community development, administration, and so on. So whenever there is leftover fund balance at the end of a year, the council has adopted this policy here to prioritize how to spend that one-time money. So the first is public safety equipment or non-recurring programs. And the reason it's non-recurring is because the available fund balance is really considered as one-time money. It's not an ongoing funding source. So we really want to align it with one-time expenditures. The second priority is to build our reserves for asset management. And what this includes is we have several asset management funds, and that's to build up basically little savings accounts in order to have enough funding to replace the city's assets when they reach their end of their useful life. So things like our fleet, equipment, technology, facilities. So a use of this available fund balance would be to supplement those reserves. The third one is capital improvement projects. That's self-explanatory. And then the fourth is a reduction in unfunded liabilities related to our pension or other post-employment benefits, which is basically retiree health. So it would be basically a pay down on our liabilities that we have with CalPERS. And then finally, either the reduction or avoidance of city debt. The city doesn't have too much debt. We only have a loan on this building and then the new Margarita Rec Center that's under construction right now. So for a city our size, we really do not have much debt on the books. Oh no, this is the policy slide. The next policy is for Measure S. So Measure S is a sales tax, a 1-cent sales tax that was approved by the voters back in 2016, became effective in 2017. And at that time, the council adopted these appropriation guidelines, basically to align with the ballot language that voters approved. So public safety is the top priority, and then we have asset management, capital improvement projects, and then general services or what we call community services. So the distribution of this funding isn't necessarily proportionate amongst these four categories, but these are more of a prioritized list. So we fund public safety first, and then asset management, and then CIP, and then general services. And you can see here with the pie chart, that is our current appropriation budget for Measure S. It's just under $52 million. We closed last year with a pretty significant surplus, so those one-time funds have been appropriated to new capital projects in the mid-year that went to council in February. So that's what created a more than 50% allocation towards capital projects. Most of that was carryover. And then, as you can see, as time goes on and the funding for public safety services and community services, as those increase, then there will be less available for capital projects. So the distribution on that pie chart will change over time. So the highlights for the general fund as of February, so this is what was presented as part of our mid-year budget. This slide summarizes the different revenue sources, and for the current fiscal year, we're looking at a revenue budget of just under $103 million. That's the highest the city has ever seen. It does include about $7 million of federal ARPA monies, or American Rescue Plan Act monies. But the chart, that shows the revenue over expenditures. So the key takeaways on this chart is, if you look at the black line, that's plotting revenue, and then the blue bars plots expenditures. And you can see that revenue exceeds expenditures in every year, so that indicates that the general fund is structurally balanced, which is where you want to be. And the other thing you can see is the little dip in fiscal year 1920, so that was clearly the COVID pandemic impact. And the general fund revenue lost about 3.5% that year, which was significantly less of an impact than we had projected. We had thought it would be more around the 9 to 10% range. But then you can see it really rebounded back the next year, and we're basically on the same growth trajectory that we were prior to the pandemic. So the city fared very well through the pandemic, and then you can also see the reduction in expenditures that helped absorb some of that loss in revenue. This is the general fund expenditures, and you can see the proportionate share goes to police and fire, with about 57% on this slide. I think we're up to 59% for the next year. General fund expenditures, about $84 million is our total budget this year. And you can see kind of the distribution here: public works, community development, administration. Administration, that includes everything from the city manager's office, city attorney, finance, HR, city clerk, all of those departments. And you can see that it's significantly less than our revenue of $103 million. So this slide shows the fund balance and our reserves. So the council has a policy, a couple of policies actually, for reserves. One of which is to set aside 20% of the general fund's fund balance into a reserve for economic uncertainty, and that is totaling just over $16.8 million currently. And then we have another reserve policy that sets aside 5% of general fund operating expenditures, and that is called the secondary reserve, $4.2 million. And then we have to commit or assign the part of fund balance that is already committed to be spent in the next year, primarily for CIP projects, and then the remaining amount is available for appropriation, following the policy that we discussed a few slides ago. So the chart here shows the fund balance over time, and the blue bar indicates the fund balance. And right now, for 21-22, we are just under $50 million in fund balance. Reserves are fully funded. That's indicated by the black line, and then the yellow dot is the desired reserve level. So we're meeting our desired reserves, not only in the current fiscal year, but every year of our 5-year projection. So very strong fiscal outlook for the general fund, and it's what helps our boss sleep at night, so and me too. This is the summary of our capital improvement program. So our CIP is a 5-year planning document. It covers fiscal year 21-22 through 25-26, and it's a very robust CIP for a city of our size. It's funded at just over $720 million with 96 different projects. But what's notable about that $720 million is that we have over $600 million funded. So we have identified funding sources for the vast majority of the projects, with about $119 million unfunded or unspecified at this point in time. So those are projects where we've started the design, but maybe we haven't secured the construction funding, so the construction is programmed to be out in years 4 or 5 of the CIP. We have, of the circulation projects, we have 29 projects totaling $572 million. These are the big road projects primarily in this category. French Valley Parkway is the largest, $138 million. This includes the $50 million federal infra grant we got a couple of years ago. Very unique for a city our size to secure that much federal funding in one grant. So that's really helped us to finalize the funding on that project. Murrieta Creek Bridge at Overland, $26 million. Nicholas Road Extension, $20 million. The pavement rehab projects, this is an annual project that's in the CIP to basically repave the roads in priority order based on the pavement condition index that was done a few years ago. So there's a list of all the road improvements that need to occur in order from worst to best. And we fund that project at about $7 million a year. And then we have the I-15 congestion relief project at $8.4 million. And that's a project where Pechanga has contributed a portion of that funding as well. And what's interesting to note is the French Valley Parkway project and the I-15 congestion relief. Both of those are on the state highway, which is outside of the city's jurisdiction. That's Caltrans jurisdiction. But because of the impacts to our city, we've taken lead on both of those projects to get those completed. The next category of projects is infrastructure. And I mentioned a little while ago the Margarita Rec Center. So that's a project that's underway right now that will demolish the previous building and then build a new state-of-the-art rec center with a pool complex. That's budgeted at about $10.9 million. And then we also have a renovation project for the CRC, Community Rec Center, about $8.5 million. We have a Santa Gertrudis Creek pedestrian bicycle trail extension project. I think that's the longest title we have in a project. $6.3 million, and then the fiber optic communication system upgrade, $1.6. So just under $95 million for this category of the CIP. And then we have the Parks and Rec category, 18 projects totaling $36 million. This is where we added a few projects at mid-year with the surplus funding that we had in Measure S. We had these two first ones were existing projects, the CRC splash pad and shade structures, just over $1 million. And then we added $1 million to the pickleball court, so this will be a pickleball court complex built on the south end near Wolf Creek, $2 million. And then we added a new project, Murrieta Creek Regional Sports Park, and that is not yet fully funded, but we've put some funding in there to start the design and start to try to secure other funding sources. That's located at the off Jefferson towards the border of Murrieta and Temecula on the left-hand side there off Jefferson. And then another new project that was added at mid-year is the Ronald Reagan Sports Park Skate Park, $1 million, and the Ronald Reagan Sports Park Hockey Rink renovation and adding a cover to the top of the rink. So those are the new projects there. And then we have two affordable housing projects that are under SARTA, which stands for the successor agency to the redevelopment agency. Two projects totaling $16.8 million. Las Haciendas, $10 million, and then the Vine Creek Affordable Housing Project at $6.7 million. And then this is our last slide before we get into the discussion questions, but I wanted to show what's happening on our headcount front. So this is a chart showing the trend in our authorized positions since 1995, and you can see over time that the position count reached its peak in 2007 and 2008 at 210 positions, and then it dropped down fairly dramatically after the Great Recession and has really been held constant with little bits of changes here and there, but we have not yet ramped back up to the pre-recession level. But we did just request, and the council approved, the addition of 10 new positions in February, and that would bring our headcount up to 190.95 full-time equivalent. And then I also wanted to note that we contract with police and fire, so that headcount is not included in these numbers. But our contract with fire brings 71 employees, and police is 151 employees. So you can see that over time, our headcount has stayed fairly lean since the Great Recession. But yet with that green line, you see the growth in our general fund. That's gone up about 43% since 07-08, and that does not include the growth that we've seen in our CIP, as well as the addition of Measure S. So 20 less employees managing, quite a bit more resources since the peak back in 07-08. So with that, I'll repeat our discussion questions here, then open it up for questions or comments. So as a commissioner, do you feel that the city's investment of financial resources is in line with the community's priorities? And if yes, which programs or projects are most beneficial to the community? And if not, how could the city better align its spending with community priorities?
Well, given the fact that this is a Old Town Local Review Board, what impacts can we make to the budget?
Well, one of the purposes of the budget engagement sessions is to try to reach deeper into the community than maybe we do at the council level. So your interaction within your capacity as the local review board, as well as just as a citizen, as a member of our community. You've got networks of information, so anything that you can relay up to the council is what we're looking for.
Okay. In regards to Measure S, how long is that in fact?
How long is that intact?
How long will it stay in place?
It is in perpetuity unless the voters vote it out.
Okay, that's the question I was asking. Do we have a capital projects list in Old Town? Do we have anything that we're going to be doing specifically in Old Town?
There's several projects in Old Town. Some of them have already been completed, but we have a lot of the Old Town sidewalks. We have the replacement of all the boardwalks.
Yep.
We had the Sam Hicks Park that was recently completed. We have a Sam Hicks perimeter fencing that was recently completed.
So nothing new? Nothing forecasted?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of that right now.
That's fine.
What's that?
Out of the,
Oh, yeah. Does Ron know of any new ones that I forgot? I'm sorry.
We do have a couple coming up. We do have the inlet filters that we're putting in place in all the storm drains, so that's going to council on the 22nd, and that's a state mandate per our MS4 permit, so for stormwater, so that is going on the 22nd, and we'll be installing roughly over the next few years, probably about 500 inlet filters to meet our requirements. That's specifically in Old Town.
yeah, but in general, there's not much of renovations to, obviously, we can't do any renovations to any of the buildings, but parking lots.
There is a project for an Old Town parking structure. Right now, it's somewhat of a placeholder project, but there is funding in there to do a design and review and conceptual plan for Old Town parking.
And
Something else that the board has asked for repeatedly throughout the years that I've been here is some updates to our wayfinding signage. So that is something that just recently got funded as a grant, is that correct?
Yeah, that's, it's a diversion of our ARPA funds. So
it.
that went to council last meeting, I believe.
Yes.
yeah,
So we've met with a couple of signed contractors to look at some of their proposals, and we're moving forward with a team here at the city to look at new wayfinding signage, maps, and parking identification as well to direct people to the public parking lots.
yeah, one of the things I was constantly being asked is the signage in Old Town was so small to see where it says public parking this way. And it's like a little blade, and they go right past it. Then they go to the next street and they don't see another sign. So signage is paramount for the visitors, of course. I did receive this right here. Did you guys get that too?
Yeah.
So I've been reviewing that as well. In the revenue section, you said we had $103 million, and our expenditures were 84, and that leaves us a reserve of an additional amount of $19 million. Where does that actually go?
So the portion of fund balance that we set aside for the reserves, the economic reserve for economic uncertainty and the secondary reserves, that's just held sort of in a savings account, if you will. And then the amount that's available for programming will be discussed at the council. That will be part of our recommendations that we bring forward in May as to how to appropriate those funds.
Okay, so, but you were mentioning that we had $601 million funded by others for a project, and we had $119 million unfunded.
That's
So
in the CIP.
Could the city council then reallocate some of that $19 million towards that?
They can.
Or to help fund the congestion relief or add more money to the congestion relief?
Yeah, the
I-5?
congestion relief project is fully funded currently. But yes, they can, that's one of the priorities of that general fund available balance policy, is that they can allocate that towards capital projects.
Okay. Any questions from you guys? Any?
I had a question. You had up in your presentation, which was an awesome presentation.
Oh,
by the
thank
way.
you.
But you had that jump, I think, that happened in the 2021 as far as reserve. Do you have any insight into how that jump happened? Was that from federal funds? Was that from taxes? I mean, what caused, because it seemed very unprecedented from the history.
Right. Really what caused that is we fared much better than we expected through the pandemic.
Excellent.
Revenue-wise. And then also compounding that is expenditures came in much, much lower. So departments were very diligent in being conservative in their spending that year with so many unknowns related to the pandemic and the economic impacts. So it's kind of a double whammy. We got more revenue than we thought, and we spent less than we thought.
Certainly, kudos to the management, right, of being able to respond that way as opposed to all the other horrible ways it could have responded. So that's excellent. Thank you very much.
No questions for me.
I have one more question. In regards to the money received from the state, it was earmarked $2 million that was going to go into Old Town as projects, funding for certain items. Do you have any information or ideas what their list of items that they may be looking at to add the money to?
I think you might be referring to, this is the community reinvestment program that the council recently approved, where we were going to be investing $2 million in basically grants for the business owners to conform or continue the outdoor dining. Part of that is the wayfinding signs. There was $500,000 dedicated to the signage. And then the grant programs are still being developed, but there was the concept of allowing businesses to get grants to construct the outdoor parklets, they're called, but the outdoor dining, to be in conformance with standards that the city will be creating.
Right. Patios. So the signage came out of that 2 million?
Correct.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Where would we find the information for the future parking lot, or the parking structure?
There's a CIP budget page in our CIP budget. I can send that to you if you would like that, or forward it through
That'd be great.
Denise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Parking structure? I mean, do they have any planning? Do you guys have any, Brandon, have you seen it? Or Stuart?
What's your specific question?
The question is it conceptual, or is it just strictly a budgeting item right now?
It's a placeholder.
placeholder?
for a future parking structure.
Okay.
So we updated the
Fair and
parking study, I think it was a year ago.
Yes.
And the conclusion in that wasn't necessarily we need a parking structure, it was more of a locational issue. And we're actually working with Fair and Piers to update the parking study and do it quarterly instead of once every couple years.
Yeah, one more time.
I know at one point, some money had been dedicated towards,
Design?
towards kind of the beginning step, but nothing really dedicated to the construction. And Ron, maybe you know a little bit more about that?
No, do not have any plans at this time. What we are currently working on is the Stampede parking lot with flood control. So there is going to be a redesign of that is already completed, but we're just going through the last hoops with flood after the acquisition when they did the Phase 2 improvements down in the creek.
And that's just the surface.
Correct.
Has Sixth Street been earmarked for the first parking structure, do you know?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. I was just trying to figure out when we were gonna see some concepts or. of
Yeah, I
what it
think that
looks
would
like.
be the most likely would be Sixth Street, but the first thing or the next thing we're gonna do is be looking at an update to our parking study, which has been underway.
Yeah.
When we brought it to the board and commission previously, there were a lot of questions about why we did certain areas in the study and didn't review other areas, and there were some comments about where people were parking for the theater. So we started looking at that and realizing that we really needed to broaden the areas that we studied in the parking study. So that is what we have been looking at more recently. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Matt.
No, other than there's a lot of considerations that go into that parking structure. We're also looking at the permanent outdoor dining and what that could potentially do in Old Town to our parking supply. So that the next round of study will be helpful.
One other thing I'll add is that we had installed some temporary parking out in front of the Civic Center here. That was really as a way to offset the parking that was being utilized for the outdoor dining program, but that is helping to offset some of the parking needs. And then in addition, I think it was in November of last year that the city leased an area from the property owner on
Kim? Steve Kim?
Right, Steve Kim. And as you enter the south side of Old Town, so that added, what was that? It was 100 and some spaces?
175.
175 spaces, so. Those will temporarily help to offset the demand and potentially help to kind of extend the time frame we have before we truly need the additional parking structure.
Yeah, we don't have any timeframes on when those will all go away, right?
No, the Steve Kim lot will obviously go away once he has approvals and begins construction for his hotel project. And the parking out here in front of the Civic Center, I have no idea what the timeline there could be. That could be many years. Ron, any thoughts on that one?
It'll be up for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, most likely. Okay. Let's see. Well, I think that's it for my comments and questions. You?
No questions.
Okay.
I didn't have any more questions in answer to your question that was up front. I thought that it was perfectly aligned, your priorities are perfectly aligned with what the community's seen. It's also extremely refreshing to see that we're shifting our priorities based on what we can do and what we have budget for and taking advantage of those situations. It's just, again, one of those pleasant surprises of how well Temecula operates. So it was a pleasure to see your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you. And it was, Commissioner Bays said, excuse me, that it was a well-presented, appreciate it very much, and it was very informative. I didn't realize, there was a couple things that I wrote down that just didn't realize, even during COVID, I knew we didn't lose that much money, but in town, when I go through town every day, it just looked really quiet, and yet we only lost 3.5%,
Yeah.
which is
Crazy.
Yeah.
comparative to other cities who lost 10 to 15 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we did real well.
Yeah, what we found is that a lot of people shifted to online purchasing. So where they may not have been purchasing in the brick and mortar stores that were closed down, Amazon deliveries were crazy. So
Yeah.
made up for a lot of it.
Yes, and with the new Amazon hub over on Diaz, it's been beneficial to our city as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, moving right along to anything else from anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your report. Item number 3 is selection of chair and vice chair for the 2022 calendar year. Attachments are provided as such. Let's go back here. Is there? Where's it at? Did I miss it, or? Yeah, there it is.
So I just throw it out for you guys real quick.
Yeah. Oh,
that-
the attached, there it is.
If you want to elect a new chair, you're certainly welcome to do so. But with board members, Bays and Duval being relatively new to the board and us not having had a lot of meetings, if you prefer to re-elect Ross in that role, that is acceptable as well, but we'll leave that to you.
Sir, I would nominate Ross.
Yeah, I'm fine with leaving. I mean, given those things, I think we should just leave it as it is and move on. Ross is awesome.
Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's, thank you.
So
Appreciate
all in favor?
Aye.
it. Aye. Okay, well, with that,
And
Oh.
Michael Bays is vice.
yes, Michael
Yes.
Bays is vice.
Okay,
We'll just keep everything status quo.
Status quo is fine.
Got it, thank you.
thank you.
I actually had a motion for business. I wanted to make a motion, either in a next meeting or in a side meeting, that the board gather together for the purpose of making recommendations on how to best have new board members train up for their responsibilities, and just have some discussion. There's of course a lot of rules and a lot of specialities that are needed. We're going to have new board members starting soon, to be able to have them, come and hit the ground running as soon as possible. So it would be to come up with a plan for how we would kind of instruct them, kind of a self-service plan for them, right? But just these are the things you're going to do. These are the things you need to kind of tool up on. Here's how you get questions answered.
Yes, I believe the city clerk offers
Oh,
those.
fantastic.
Yes, and also with like the Brown Act, et
Okay.
cetera, she'll,
Okay,
I'll let her know.
excellent. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. That'd be great.
Okay, before we move on to that, let's see, I know it says adjournment, but is there anything from building?
A couple new projects coming in. We have a 4th Street Garage TI. They're making a new bar, so there'll be mixed-use project there. The old Root Beer Building, let's see, it's proposed 3-story with office buildings on the 2nd floor and above, restaurant and other uses for the ground floor. And we have a proposed hotel development plan for the Temecula Resort, 7 stories, 475,000 square feet. That's it.
Do you know how many rooms that is?
I'm not sure.
Okay, just square footage is
Yeah.
475,000?
Yeah.
That's including parking structure with it, from what I
I
understand.
not quite sure on that.
Okay,
I believe that square footage would be the actual, like, habitable space, hallways, et cetera. And for all the details on that, if you have further questions, Scott Cooper is the planner, and he can give you more details than you'd wish to have.
oh. Planner. Okay. Public Works?
I think we covered it all during the course of the presentation,
Okay.
as far as CIP projects in Old Town.
Okay. All right, well, with that in mind, I guess we will adjourn this meeting, and again, in the honor of Peg Moore. Thank you very much for attending this meeting with us. It was very informative, and we will see each other when we see each other. All adjourned.